Iceland is often perceived as a strange and distant country well known for its geysers and frequent volcanic eruptions. It has nearly 400,000 inhabitants, with more than a third living in the capital, Reykjavik. In 1944, during the occupation of Denmark in World War II, Iceland voted overwhelmingly to become a republic. Institutional and legal traditions, however, have remained closely linked to Denmark, which has sometimes led to renewed debates as the ones related to the constitution inherited from the Danish king in the 19th century. In 2008, a series of protests motivated by a major financial crisis and corruption scandals attracted global attention. As in Chile in 2019, the population claimed for a new constitution in a process that included novel forms of citizens' engagement that evoked interest around the world. A draft constitutional bill stalled in Parliament, even after a consultative referendum in which two-thirds of voters confirmed their support of a new constitution. More than a decade later, all seems to be back to normal. The presidential elections are scheduled to be held on June 1, 2024. 4 years ago, President Gudni Johannesson was re-elected with a surprising 92% of the votes. He has decided not to compete this time. In Iceland, any citizen could run for office if gathers at least 1,500 signatures. More than 60 started the signature collection and 13 qualified. In this episode of Who is Voting in 2024, we ask, what is at stake in the Icelandic presidential elections? Listen now anywhere you get your podcast. We welcome today the political scientist Eva Onoduttirand and the philosopher John Olafsson, both professors at the University of Iceland. Hello, Eva and John.
Hi. Hello.
Eva, the president of Iceland is directly elected by first-past-the-post voting. The candidacies need 1,500 signatures to run for office. How does the system work? Do political parties matter?
So if I first answer your last question, so in the presidential election in Iceland, political parties do not matter. We have had, through the years, maybe one candidate that is kind of a candidate for one of the parties, the Independence Party, but that candidate has generally not done very well. But the main answer is that this is not a political election in the sense that political parties do matter. So this 1,500 signatures, this is in the Constitution since 1944 and has not been changed since then. And at the time they put in this number that it should be from 1,500 to 3,000 signatures. They were thinking about that it should be some kind of X number of the population. I can't remember exactly how many people lived in Iceland in 1944. I think there were around 100,000, but today we are almost 400,000. So this number is not reflective of how it was supposed to work originally. But because it's in the Constitution, it's hard to change it. And then we have this first-past-the-post system, and it's pretty easy to run for presidency. As you already explained, we have 13 candidates, and that means that we can have a winner with maybe 25 or 30% of the vote, because we have this first-past-the-post system. And we are having, there's a lot of this ongoing discussion now that this maybe needs to be changed. Maybe we need to have a higher number of signatures, or maybe we need to have, a different electoral system for the president, like a single transferable vote where you vote for your favorite candidate and your second favorite, or even two rounds of elections, like we know from France, for example.
Thanks. Very original system. And as you said, this number of signatures established in 1944 probably needs an updating at current times. John, you have mentioned that the first-past-the-post system creates a populist momentum. In 2020, current President Johannesson was re-elected with 92% of the votes. Such figures are only common in authoritarian countries, which is not the case of Iceland. How do you explain that? Is this connected with the populist momentum?
No, actually, it might be the opposite of that momentum, even though it looks strange from the outside. But I think to explain the large majority of votes Guðni Johnson got when he was re-elected, the presidential position is generally perceived as a kind of an honorary status. So to have presidents voted out of office was for decades after the founding of the Republic almost conceived to be impossible. The president would be elected, then he or she would sit as long as he or she wanted, basically. But this started to change in 2000, or actually a little bit earlier, and there have been challengers many times now, but they tend to get a marginal part of the votes. And I think the 92% of the votes simply mean that when a president is generally well-liked, people are very unlikely to want to vote him out of office. About the populist momentum, however, that's directly connected to what Eva was talking about before. Since we have this very easy way of running, it has become, almost a vanity thing to do. And you could easily imagine a strong populist leader with a small but very dedicated followers who might be able to win this with, 15-20% of the votes. It is very difficult at this point to imagine something like that, someone being elected with 15%. It's certainly possible. And that's also why in the latest round of constitutional debates a few years ago, I'm not talking about the Constitutional Council now, but a later revision effort, this was one of the largest discussion moments that, and it is clear that the great majority of Icelanders thinks the system is outdated, that we need either two rounds of votes to be sure that the president receives 50%, or a single transferable vote system or something like that. I think this system, I would guess now that we have actually more than 70 people that were intending to run. We might finally see some effort to change both the system with the supporters, but also maybe instituting a more complex electoral system for the president.
Yeah, thanks, Sean. Eva, you mentioned that the president has, both of you mentioned that has more an honorific status, but at the same time, Sean spoke about this potential populistic momentum. And then the Constitution allows the president or gives the president a veto power and the possibility of calling a referendum. Do you see a potential of these mechanisms to be in action in future times, to play a role?
It's very hard to predict. So basically, the role of the president, according to the Constitution, is quite unclear, but he still has some power. And it's the veto power and the possibility of calling a referendum is one thing. And it has been used when there has been some kind of crisis. So last time it was used was when we were recovering from the economic crash, and our president at the time refused to sign the so-called Icesave agreements. But the president is also very important, has a very important role in the formation of government, or can have, especially if there is a challenge forming a government. And that means that when people are running for president, it is kind of like a popularity contest. And we have different types, we have different personalities. Like we have a candidate that is very funny, and we have a candidate that comes with a background in politics, and then we have one from the academia, and then we have from the business world, and they're like kind of, I would say, almost random things that kind of could make the winner, if you could say it like that. And I think one of the reasons for that is that the role of the president is quite unclear according to our constitution.
Thanks, Eva. My next question is about the main concerns of the Icelandic electorate. Which kind of issues are relevant for the campaign, considering that Iceland ranks high in international comparisons in terms of education, protection of civil liberties, government transparency, economic freedom, etc. What matters in these elections? These issues, or which kind of issues?
Well, I think also to pick on what Eva said before, it tends to be a little bit random what matters. And actually, just to play a little bit more with the populist momentum. I think there is so much space in these political arrangements that we have for an imaginative and talented person to do basically whatever he or she might like to do. This can be very nice. I mean, Vigdís Finnbogadóttir, who was our president for 16 years, she put the restoration of forest in Iceland on her agenda. And this was a very, very good objective to have and something that defined her presidency in a way. But we could also see people have something entirely different to fight for. And I think in this campaign, we see there is the former politician who has stepped out of a role as prime minister to become the president. And she talks about basic values. She has a rather predictable agenda. But then there are other people, maybe not as high on the list of candidates or as likely to win, who have, much stranger ideas. And I think actually the person who is, according to the latest poll, the front leader, she is a politically totally unknown entity, you could say. And the way she has been emphasizing also certain basic values, rural belonging and identity and unity and so on, shows very well how much this office is performance defined to a large extent. But that also carries on into the presidency itself. And Eva mentioned Ólafur Ragnar Grímsson, who used the veto power and who actually made it alive, so to say. He also evoked ideas with many people, especially after the financial crisis, that there were actually other issues in the constitution that could be redefined by a strong and imaginative president. For instance, the constitution strangely says that the president is allowed to propose bills in the parliament. Now, if you ask a lawyer about this in Iceland, the lawyer will say, oh, of course, this does not mean that the president can propose bills in parliament. But of course, if you read the constitution, it means exactly the opposite. And it means there is a lot of so-called tradition around what is possible and what not. And I think we could easily imagine candidates who could become presidents who would like to try out the various possibilities and formulations, maybe trying to seek political support for some agenda or something like that. So, you could see this as something scary or you could see this as something interesting. I think it's a bit of both.
Yeah, thanks, Eva. Do you want to add something to this?
I think so, because there's no one topic that is kind of the main topic of the campaign, among other things, because the role of the president is so wide open. And if we think about what are the main concerns of the Icelandic electorate, it will be very different between different voters. Like one voter says, I want a president that I trust to make good appearance in the international arena and etc. And another voter will say, well, I want a president that is kind of human and kind of like us. And then the third voter says, I want a president that is female or gay or whatever. So basically, I would say that the main concerns of the Icelandic electorate, that they are choosing a person that they trust to do this. And it's different things for different voters.
There is also this eternal discussion, should the president be politically connected or not? And if we look through his Icelandic history, we have had a mixture of both. We had a president in the 50s, the second president, who was a former prime minister and was very influential in foreign policy at the time. And then we had scholars, academics in the 70s and 80s who were totally different and emphasized sort of the cultural and moral qualities of the president's role. And this is always, and we see that also now in the campaign, that the discussion is a lot about that. There's one of the candidates today, I just saw in the paper this morning, was coming out and saying exactly this. I think it's best if the president is not politically connected. So that's a kind of a debate that is always going on about this role.
Yeah, I see. Let me now move to the international arena. Iceland has the smallest population of any NATO member and is the only one with no standing army, but at the same time is located in a key area. Is there a public concern about the Ukraine-Russian war? Is this a topic in the campaign or is it a concern for the population in general?
So there is a public concern about this war, but it's not a topic in the campaign. Some candidates talk about that in the international arena, they should be, advocating peace and a peaceful solution to conflicts and etc. So I'm not sure that they have mentioned this war particularly, but then they're more emphasizing like, if we have a role in the international arena, that would be to unite people and helping peace or peace resolution. But of course, there's a public concern about the Ukraine-Russia war in Iceland, but it's not a topic in the campaign other than what would be the president's role on the international arena, and that would be to guarantee peace or advocate peace.
And John, this question is also for you, and also would like to ask you if the constitutional replacement is still a concern for the Icelandic population.
Yeah, I think it's interesting how the Icelandic public seems to perceive the international role of the president, because in the 90s, for instance, when Ólafur Ragnar Grímsson was elected, this was clearly his major strength, that he was seen as an Icelandic politician who had a large network around the world, a global network, and would easily be at home anywhere in the world. So that seems to be more the matter than what kind of policy issues or what kind of problems there are around in the world. As for the constitution, it's a very strange how this has developed, because there is no question that there is majority of Icelanders has been supporting constitutional revision for a long time, but no revision has taken place. I think this is still the case, but you might still say that the issue is not sufficiently important for people to make it matter in elections, not in parliamentary elections, and probably not in presidential elections either. And as far as I am able to see, none of the candidates has, as far as I know, made this really an issue in his campaign. But it's important to mention still that the outgoing president, Guðni Jóhannesson, he has expressed a very strong opinion that this is necessary and very important. And apparently he is rather upset that nothing has happened during the 8 years he has been president. He said at the beginning that he considered this for the president's role of major importance to have a revision.
Thank you. And we are arriving to the end. I have a very last question. You may know that there is a public, general, global conversation on the democratic erosion or democratic backsliding in different areas of the world. And I would like to know how this conversation is viewed from Iceland, and also if there are some risks for democracy in the country. Eva?
That's a tough question. Of course, I would like to say that everything is perfect here in Iceland, but that's, of course, not true. It also depends on what we are thinking about when we talk about democratic backsliding. If we're talking about like taking back citizen rights, I think we are doing okay here in Iceland. But if we're talking about, for example, immigration or the gay community or people that are maybe in a weak position for some reason, then of course we are in a danger of backsliding here in Iceland as elsewhere. So the question is quite open. So I would say, of course, this is a concern, and we have to be careful in protecting our rights, whether it's citizen rights or just rights to be as we are, and human rights and etc. And not allow populist parties to take over the discussion or other groups that could kind of maybe try to limit the rights of other social groups.
Yeah. John?
Yeah, I agree with Eva. I also, I think still there are issues to be concerned about. They might not be as deep or as toxic as in other countries, if you look, the US especially. But, sometimes people tend to look at Iceland, a little bit the way you described at the beginning, Janina. It's a kind of a mysterious island, and then it's idealized, So after the financial crisis, many people seriously thought that Iceland, because of its small size, would become something that was called a laboratory of democracy and something like that. And it's often underappreciated that in small communities, the divisions can be extremely deep. And we have, for instance, a rural-urban divide, which is very difficult to overcome. Also, certain conflicts about territory and land use and ownership, which are really difficult. And I think one of the problems I see with Icelandic democracy is that we have not been able to really profit and make something out of the various democratic innovations and new ideas that have been around in the world for the last 15 years. Iceland began pretty well with the Constitutional Council and the work around the Constitution, but this has more or less stalled, and that's also why I think there is a lot of stagnation I see in Icelandic politics.
Yeah, thanks Eva and John for helping us to know more about Iceland. As many people tend to be the Iceland as a very strange and special area of the world, and now we have much more information to understand this electoral process and also the working of democracy in the country. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. It was very nice. Thank you.